When did you last flip a tortilla package over before dinner? Most people never do. They see soft, authentic, simple, healthy, or even carb balance on the front, toss it in the cart, and keep moving. That is exactly where the trap lives. Because a tortilla can be a simple kitchen staple, or it can be a small industrial project wrapped in a familiar shape. And if you buy tortillas for your own kitchen, or for parents, children, or a spouse who watches blood sugar, sodium, or stomach comfort, the back of the package matters more than the logo on the front. This video is for label reading, not medical advice. If you have diabetes, a food allergy, celiac disease, high blood pressure, or any condition that changes what you should eat, follow the advice of your doctor or dietitian before changing your routine. And if this kind of breakdown helps you shop with less guesswork, subscribe to Golden Menu now. We are going to make the next 30 minutes useful. Here is how to watch this one. Do not just listen for the brand names, listen for the pattern. If you keep hearing the same cluster, bleached flour, added fats, gums, preservatives, and a health halo on the front, that is the real lesson. The point is not to shame people for buying tortillas. The point is to make the shelf easier to read the next time you are standing in front of it with a basket in your hand and dinner still unresolved. That is especially useful for older adults, because many of us were raised to trust familiar labels, and many of us also shop with more care now than we used to. When the label gets long, the front panel often gets louder. That is not an accident. The front panel is trying to do the emotional work, so the back panel does not have to. Here is the rule for today. I am not judging tortillas by taste alone. I am judging them by how honest the ingredient story is. If a tortilla needs bleached flour, dough conditioners, gums, preservatives, emulsifiers, sweeteners, and a health halo just to sound better than the one next to it, that is worth noticing. If a tortilla keeps the ingredient list short enough that you can read it without squinting, that matters too. So let us start with the first one. Number 7. Calidad flour tortillas. Calidad is the kind of brand many people barely notice. That is part of the problem. The package looks plain, the price is friendly, and the word tortilla does all the heavy lifting. But when you turn the package over, you see the same old pattern that shows up again and again in this aisle. Enriched flour, vegetable shortening, preservatives, mono and diglycerides, sodium metabisulfite, sodium aluminum phosphate, sodium aluminum sulfate, hydrogenated soybean oil. That is a lot of support work for a food that should mostly be flour, water, fat, and salt. For an older shopper, this matters because plain-looking packaging can make the label feel safer than it is. You are not buying a bag that screams health. You are buying a bag that whispers convenience. And convenience can be expensive if it makes you stop reading. Now, to be fair, Calidad is not the only brand doing this. It is simply one of the clearest examples of how a plain tortilla can still be built like a shelf-stable product first and a kitchen food second. If your rule is simple food, this one does not pass the test. The reason this kind of product survives is simple. Most shoppers do not buy it because they love the ingredient story. They buy it because the package looks harmless and the price feels easy. That is enough to keep it in the cart. And that is why the front panel matters so much in this aisle. The practical lesson is not complicated. If the packaging is plain, do not let that trick you into thinking the food is plain too. The front of the bag is marketing. The back of the bag is the part that tells the truth. Number 6. Great value flour tortillas. This is where the budget trap shows up. Great Value is the brand many families buy when the grocery bill needs to stay under control. That is a real concern, and I respect it. But cheap does not mean simple. The Great Value flour tortillas can carry enriched flour, palm oil, mono and diglycerides, calcium propionate, potassium sorbate, sodium aluminum phosphate, sodium aluminum sulfate, fumaric acid, hydrogenated soybean oil, sodium metabisulfite, and enzymes. That is not the ingredient story of a tortilla made to be understood. It is the ingredient story of a tortilla made to survive storage, transport, and a long life on the shelf. And that is the line older viewers need to watch. Because when a brand looks plain and the price looks good, many people stop there. The package does not invite a second thought. That is the problem. If you are feeding a family on a budget, you do not need guilt. You need clarity. And clarity says this is still a processed flour tortilla with the usual support system underneath. Not horrible. Not magical. Just another example of why the front panel is never the whole story. There is also a practical angle here for older adults on fixed income. Private label food can be a smart choice when the quality is good and the label is honest. But when the copycat version is still a long ingredient list, dressed up as a budget win, the savings are not as simple as they look. You may save money at the register and spend it later in confusion. That is a trade-off worth noticing. The rule for budget shopping is simple. Save money where the label still makes sense. Do not save money by buying a cheap version of a product you do not really understand. That is how a bargain stops being a bargain. Number 5. La Banderita Family Pack Tortillas. La Banderita is where the branding gets smoother. The package feels warmer. The name feels more traditional. The promise sounds more like home. That is exactly why it can fool a shopper who is trying to be careful. The ingredient list still leans on enriched unbleached flour, vegetable shortening, glycerin, salt, leavening agents, wheat protein, preservatives, and dough conditioner ingredients such as fumaric acid, xanthan gum, mono and diglycerides, and sodium metabisulfites. The front says soft and authentic. The back says engineered for texture, softness, and shelf life. Those are not the same promise. This is a good moment to remember something older shoppers already know from years of grocery buying. When a label starts sounding comforting, that is the moment to slow down. Comfort language is useful. It is not the same as ingredient honesty. La Banderita is not the worst tortilla on this list. It is just one of the easiest to trust too quickly. And that is often how products win shelf space. They do not have to be perfect. They only have to feel familiar. That is why this one deserves a careful look from older viewers. If you grew up with flour tortillas as a family staple, the emotional reaction to a package like this can be instant. You see the name. You see the soft round tortillas on the front. You assume the food is close to the old version. But ingredient honesty lives in the back, not in the feeling the package creates. And this is where a lot of smart older shoppers get caught. They do not fall for a flashy logo. They fall for a comforting one. That is why the label has to be read even more carefully when the branding feels warm and familiar. Warm packaging is not a nutrition label. Number 4. Ortega Flour Tortillas. Ortega is the kind of brand that turns dinner into a shortcut. Soft taco kits, flour tortillas, seasoning packets, sauce. Everything packed into one easy weeknight routine. That convenience is real. So is the ingredient load. If you are shopping for blood sugar control, this is the point where the front of the bag should not be allowed to finish the conversation. Read the full ingredient list. Compare it with a simpler tortilla. Then decide whether the extra fiber is worth the extra processing for your own kitchen. Now let us switch to the part of the video that gives you a better answer. Not perfect. Better. Because the goal here is not to pretend tortillas are suddenly health food. The goal is to find the ones that are closer to real food and easier to defend on the label. Best option number 2. Siete grain-free cassava flour tortillas. Siete started from a family problem, not a marketing brainstorm. That matters. The brand was built because someone in the family needed a tortilla that fit a different way of eating without taking the tortilla out of the meal. The ingredient list is short enough to understand at a glance. Cassava flour, water, coconut flour, coconut oil, apple cider vinegar, sea salt, xanthan gum. That is it. There is no bleached flour, no preservative stack, no dough conditioner parade, no long line of ingredients whose only job is to make the package survive longer than the food should. This is the kind of tortilla that works because the ingredients belong together, not because a chemical is rescuing a formula that would otherwise collapse. For older adults, that simplicity is valuable. Not because it is a miracle, it is not, but because it is readable, and readable food is easier to trust. If you want a grain-free option that keeps the label short, this is one of the clearest ones on the shelf right now. It is also the kind of choice that works best for viewers who want a tortilla-shaped food without a tortilla-shaped ingredient list. That is a very different promise from the reformulated products above, and for a lot of viewers, that difference is the whole reason the brand matters. You are not buying a miracle, you are buying a shorter, cleaner explanation at the shelf. Best option number 1, La Tortilla Factory Organic White Corn and Wheat Tortillas. This is the traditional style option that holds up best in this group. The ingredient list is still not as tiny as a home kitchen recipe, but it is much easier to defend than the products above it. Organic white corn masa flour, organic wheat gluten, organic cultured wheat flour, baking powder, tartaric acid, organic cane sugar, organic guar gum, sea salt. That is a real step down in complexity from the brands on the skip list. And the important part is not just that the list is shorter, it is that the ingredients are easier to understand. There is no bleached flour line trying to disguise refinement as tradition. There is no long preservative stack trying to make a soft tortilla act like a month-old product. There is no health halo trying to distract you from the back of the package. This is the kind of tortilla that feels like a tortilla. It behaves more like food and less like a project. And that is why it earns the top spot. The difference shows up in the kitchen too. When a tortilla starts from a more honest ingredient base, it tends to taste more like a real ingredient and less like a storage solution. That is one reason the better traditional style tortillas usually feel more satisfying, even when they are not trying as hard to impress you from the package. If you have ever eaten a restaurant tortilla that tasted obviously better than the grocery version, this is usually part of the reason. The package was not doing enough work. That is the reason it ends up on the safe side of the list. The tortilla does not need the package to pretend it is something else. It is already doing enough on its own. Now let me say this clearly. Siete and La Tortilla Factory are not perfect foods. They are not magic. They are not a pass to stop thinking. They are simply the two options on this list that give you a cleaner starting point if you want a tortilla that is easier to read and easier to defend. That is a big difference, and it is the right kind of difference for a channel like this. We are not trying to sell fantasy food. We are trying to make the label less slippery. That is the part most shopping videos skip. They tell you what is popular. This one is telling you what is easier to understand. Here is the final rule to take into the store. Do not let the word tortilla do all the work. Check the front, then flip the package over. If the ingredient list is full of bleached flour, dough conditioners, gums, preservatives, and long chemistry words, you are probably looking at a shelf-stable product wearing a family-friendly mask. If the ingredient list is short, clear, and close to how food should actually look on paper, you are in better territory. And if a low-carb number is the only thing making a tortilla look healthy, slow down and read the rest of the label. The number on the front is not the whole story. The story is in the back. If you want the fastest possible way to shop this aisle, use this test. If the package needs a health claim on the front to make you feel calm, slow down. If the ingredient list makes sense in one pass, you are closer to a better buy. If the package reads like a chemistry lesson, put it back and keep walking. That little habit will save you more confusion than any slogan ever will. And that is really the heart of the whole video. Not fear. Not guilt. Just a better way to read the package before it reaches your cart. If this video helped, leave a comment with the next tortilla brand you want checked. And if you want more label breakdowns that actually help you shop smarter, subscribe to Golden Menu. Because once you learn to read the package, the aisle starts telling the truth. Ortega flour tortillas can include enriched bleached wheat flour, water, intrasterified soybean oil, sodium aluminum phosphate, potassium bicarbonate, sodium bicarbonate, cornstarch, calcium sulfate, ammonium glutamate, enzymes, mono and diglycerides, hydrogenated cottonseed oil, carboxymethylcellulose, potassium sorbate, calcium propionate, fumaric acid, and sodium metabisulfite. That is a long line for a product that is supposed to play the role of a simple wrapper. For older viewers, this is one of the most important lessons in the whole video. Easy dinner does not always mean easy label. The box makes the meal feel solved. The ingredient list says the food still needed a lot of help to stay soft, stable, and market ready. That does not mean nobody can ever buy it. It means you should not let the family-friendly tone of the box talk you out of reading the back. If a tortilla needs this much chemistry to feel traditional, then the tradition is mostly happening in the marketing. That is a very useful filter for older adults. If the thing in your hand depends on more shelf life work than kitchen work, then you are not buying simplicity, you are buying convenience with a costume on it. And convenience is fine when you know that is what you are buying. The problem starts when convenience gets mistaken for better food. If you buy a brand like this, the smart move is to treat it like a special convenience product, not a daily default. That one habit changes the whole way you think about the aisle. It keeps convenience in the right place. It also keeps your attention on the products that ask for less explanation. We are halfway through the list now, and the pattern is already obvious. The brands are not all the same, but the formula keeps repeating. Refined flour, added fats, texture helpers, preservatives, and a front panel that tries to make the whole thing look more natural than it is. If this breakdown is helping, tap like now. It tells the channel that you want more label videos like this, and it helps other people find the same kind of shopping guide. It also tells the algorithm that people are actually staying with the video long enough to care about the details, which is exactly what we want on a long label breakdown like this. And if you are one of the people who likes to pause the video and inspect the package in your kitchen, that is even better. That is the whole point. Number 3. Guerrero flour tortillas. Guerrero is where the trust gets personal. For a lot of families, this is the name that feels closest to tradition. The packaging speaks the language of home. The brand positioning leans hard into authenticity. And that is why the ingredient list matters even more. On several Guerrero flour tortilla products, you will see enriched bleached flour, water, vegetable shortening, modified food starch, mono and diglycerides, cellulose gum, soy lecithin, artificial flavor, and preservatives such as calcium propionate and sorbic acid. That is not a small amount of processing. That is a formula built for softness, stretch, and shelf life. It can still make a useful meal. It just is not the same thing as the traditional image the package is borrowing from. Older adults are especially vulnerable to this kind of brand trust because many of us were trained to believe that a familiar name usually meant a better product. That used to be a decent shortcut. It is not a reliable shortcut anymore. The problem with Guerrero is not that it is invisible. The problem is that it looks culturally close while still depending on the same industrial helpers as the rest of the aisle. That is the gap. And once you see it, it is hard to unsee. For older adults, Guerrero is a classic example of why a familiar cultural signal is not the same thing as a cleaner product. The brand may remind you of family dinners, neighborhood grocery stores, and the kind of tortilla that feels closer to the way food used to be. That emotional memory is real, but it does not rewrite the ingredient list. When a label asks you to trust the feeling instead of the formula usually deserves the final word. If you want a practical shopping rule from this section, here it is. Do not buy a tortilla because it reminds you of home. Buy it because the ingredient list would still make sense if the package had no picture on it at all. That is a much better test. Number 2. Old El Paso flour tortillas. Old El Paso is not just a tortilla brand. It is a memory machine. It is the box that made taco night feel like a routine, a ritual, and a family event. That kind of trust is powerful. And that is exactly why the label deserves extra attention. Old El Paso flour tortillas and kit-style products can use enriched bleached flour, water, palm oil, glycerin, baking powder, mono and diglycerides, potassium sorbate, calcium propionate, fumaric acid, hydrogenated vegetable oil, and dough conditioner ingredients. Even the seasoning packets in the kits can bring in maltodextrin, silicon dioxide, sugar, modified starch, and other support ingredients that have nothing to do with the picture on the front of the box. The result is a product that feels like a family ritual, but behaves like a processed, shelf-stable system. That is a very different thing. And this is the part that matters for older shoppers. A product can be culturally familiar and still not be the cleanest choice. Old El Paso wins because it feels solved before you ever read the label. But solved is not the same as simple. And simple is what many people actually want when they are trying to keep dinner under control. That matters even more for older viewers who are buying for grandchildren. The box is designed to make the family moment feel easy. And a lot of the time, easy wins. But the brand story is doing part of the work that the ingredient panel should be doing on its own. Once you notice that, the whole box reads differently. And once you start seeing taco night as a ritual built around a process system, it gets easier to make better decisions without losing the fun of the meal. That is the goal, not guilt. Better visibility. Number 1. Mission Carb Balance Flour Tortillas. This is the most deceptive one on the list. Not because the company is hiding anything. The label is right there. It is deceptive because the front panel sounds like a win. Carb balance. Low carb. Fiber-filled. Zero sugar. That is the exact kind of language that makes careful shoppers relax too fast. And then the ingredient list gets long. Modified wheat starch. Enriched bleached flour. Wheat gluten isolate. Vegetable shortening. Cellulose gum. Distilled monoglycerides. Natural flavor. Sucralose. Fumaric acid. Calcium propionate. Sorbic acid. That is a reformulated tortilla built to make the nutrition panel look better. And yes, the fiber and net carb numbers may be attractive, but the whole point of reading the label is to notice what the front number leaves out. For seniors who watch blood sugar, this is especially important because the health halo can be stronger than the actual food story. The bag sounds like a smart choice. The ingredient list sounds like a project. That gap is why Mission Carb Balance lands at number 1 on the skip list. The tortilla aisle is full of products that look comforting. This is the one that looks helpful. That is why it deserves the top warning. For a lot of older adults, especially anyone tracking blood sugar, the number on the front can feel like the whole point. The package says carb balance, so the brain relaxes. But the ingredient list says the product had to be redesigned to make that number appear. There is nothing wrong with wanting fewer carbs. The issue is assuming that a lower number always means a simpler food. Sometimes the lower number is just a more complicated formula with better branding.